As we discussed when we met in my office, I'm deeply troubled by the virulent anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias at the United Nations. And since Hamas's brutal massacre on October 7th, the Jewish community in Pennsylvania and across our country has seen an explosion in hate. As you know, this is not theoretical for me and for Dina. We live in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, where we had the Tree of Life tragedy, and a painful reminder of where that hate can lead. In Congress, you've done an incredible job of pushing back against anti-Semitism in our nation's institutions. You exposed the presidents of the three leading universities for their lack of moral clarity. And I was one of the first to call for the firing of the president of UPenn because of the tough questioning that you forced her and other presidents to leave office. I'm confident you can bring that same fire and effectiveness and leadership to the UN. And let me start by asking how you'll fight back against anti-Semitism and bias against Israel within the UN. Hamas terrorists have been operating with impunity from UNRWA facilities, and UNRWA employees even participated in the massacre on October 7th. So beyond funding, how will you work with our allies to end UNRWA's mandate and shift legitimate humanitarian functions to other UN organs or trusted NGOs?
Thank you so much, Senator McCormick, and thank you for your leadership combating anti-Semitism. I know it's important to the American people and it's important to Pennsylvanians, and something that I am deeply committed to doing in this role. It's one of the reasons why in my conversation with President Trump, I was interested in this position, because if you look at the anti-Semitic rot within the United Nations, there are more resolutions targeting Israel than any other country, any other crisis combined. And we have significant national Security Councils, the anti-Semitism, whether it's UN Women failing to condemn Hamas's terrorist attack and terrorist regime against innocent civilian women, using rape and targeting women, specifically taking them hostage. I am overjoyed that those 3 young women hostages were returned home. We need to stay committed to ensuring every hostage is brought home. I've met with many hostage families. This position, we need to be a voice of moral clarity on the UN Security Council and at the United Nations at large, for the world to hear the importance of standing with Israel. And I intend to do that. This year will mark the 50th year since the disgraceful Zionism is Racism resolution at the United Nations. And at the time, our U.S. Ambassador, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, spoke out strongly against that disgraceful resolution. That is the type of leadership that I hope to bring, if confirmed, to the United Nations. And President Trump has a tremendous record when it comes to standing with Israel, whether it's the Abraham Accords, whether it's his commitment to combating anti-Semitism, or recognizing Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. This is a strong, strong record, and I hope to do that at the UN if confirmed.
Thank you.
President Trump rightfully stopped sending U.S. taxpayer funds to UNRWA. President Biden decided to reinstate funding without insisting on significant reform, and I was quite disappointed by that. Congress was correct, I believe, in defunding UNRWA last year. I believe the prohibition should be permanent. My question for you is, how do you think you should deal with UNRWA? How do you think we should address U.S. taxpayer funds having gone to an organization like that has been directly complicit in terrorism in the October 7th, 2023 attack?
We should never tolerate any U.S. taxpayer funds going towards terrorism. As in my question with the ranking member, Shaheen, I was one of the members that voted to defund UNRWA. I was one of the leaders in standing for that important appropriations vote, which there is a bipartisan consensus on, with significant members, Republicans, as well as some Democrats who voted to defund it. I think we can look to organizations within the UN system, such as UNHCR, such as the World Food Program, working with USAID, which are proven organizations. They still need, reform efforts and modernization, but don't have the terrorist ties that UNRWA had, particularly that were exposed during the October 7th Hamas attack against Israel. Whether it was Hamas's leader Sinwar carrying an UNRWA teacher's passport, or whether it was the UNRWA office above a Hamas data center, or individuals within UNRWA who participated in the terrorist attack against Israel on October 7th. So that I fully support the president's commitment to defunding, and I'm proud to have voted for that in the Congress.
Has a long history of disproportionately targeting Israel with resolutions, inquiries, and sanctions. Specifically, Agenda Item 7, which mandates the discussion of alleged Israeli human rights abuses at every session. This agenda item is unique to Israel and is not applied to any other nation like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, or Venezuela, who all have documented severe human rights abuses. Given that U.S. funding indirectly supports investigations and resolutions that single out Israel, what is your plan to increase transparency and accountability in the allocation of UN resources and American taxpayer dollars?
I think this is a key question that I want to work with this committee. The chairman has spoken extensively in various hearings about the importance to know where every dollar goes within the UN system, and that is my commitment to do so, to deliver that transparency and accountability as part of this process, assessing all of our UN programs, our funding, to see if they're effective and if they are supportive of American values. And then if they're not, then we need to have serious conversations with our appropriators.
Many UN member states with barbaric human rights records are quick to criticize Israel while avoiding scrutiny for their own bad behavior. How do you plan to hold them accountable?
I think holding them accountable with our voice is very important. Speaking out, that was one of the lessons in the committee hearing with higher education, with the colleges and universities. When you speak out with moral clarity, the world and the American people listen. We need to ensure we have that moral clarity with our U.S. ambassador to the United Nations every single day.
The President has said he wants to bring long-term peace and security to the region. Clearly, Hamas can have no role in that future. But long-term peace must include security, self-determination, and dignity for Israelis and Palestinians alike. When we talked in my office, you agreed that we should stand up and protect universal human rights and self-determination for all people, including both Israelis and Palestinians. And I'd just like to hear you today say that that's your view.
To put that view in the context of the day after question, I think President Trump is uniquely positioned at this very challenging moment to bring peace to the region, to eradicate terrorists of Hamas and Hezbollah, to protect Israel's national security. If you look at the failures, we've given billions of dollars, and this is just the bilateral aid to the Palestinians, and it has been abused by Hamas.
Representative Stefanik, it was a very simple question. I'm just asking you if you agree with the statement that in order to achieve long-term peace and stability in the Middle East, that we have to secure the human rights and rights of self-determination for both Israelis and Palestinians. That's a yes or no?
I support human rights for all, and I think it's a disgrace that Hamas and Hezbollah have stripped human rights of the Palestinian people, and we need to ensure that we are standing up for human rights, and Israel is standing up for human rights. It is a beacon of human rights in the region.
We agree with that. I asked you in my office also about whether Palestinians have the right of self-determination. My understanding was you said yes. Do you have a different answer today?
That was not the direct question that we discussed. I said the Palestinian people.
That Palestinians have the right of self-determination?
I believe the Palestinian people deserve so much better than the failures that they've had from terrorist leadership.
It's just a pretty simple question.
And I believe we need
I take it
peace in the region. Of course, they deserve human rights.
So
I want to ensure that, number one, we bring the hostages home.
So do all of us. Representative Stefanik, let me just ask you. I have 30 seconds left. I'm rarely surprised by answers in my office, but I did ask you whether you subscribe to the views of Finance Minister Smotrich.
Of who? I'm sorry,
Smotrich. This is the Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich and the former National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, who believe that Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank. And in that conversation, you told me that, yes, you shared that view. Is that your view today?
Yes.
Okay. I think when it comes to this very difficult issue, if the president is going to succeed at bringing peace and stability to the Middle East, we're going to have to look at the UN Security Council resolutions, not just the ones on Lebanon, which we should enforce, but other UN Security Council resolutions. And it's going to be very difficult to achieve that if you continue to hold the view that you just expressed. which is a view that was not held by the founders of the State of Israel, who were secular Zionists, not religious Zionists. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The UN so-called Human Rights Council has a standing agenda item, and that standing agenda item is called item number 7, and it exclusively targets Israel. It makes it the only member of the UN, the only member state singled out in this manner. The Council consistently devotes excessive time, I think time at all is excessive, in criticizing Israel while often overlooking the atrocities in countries like Iran, like Syria. 2024 alone, the UN General Assembly adopted 17 different resolutions against Israel, compared to only 6 against the whole rest of the world. I mean, it's astonishing that this is going on in the UN. So what are your views on item 7, and what steps would you think to do in terms of removal of this from the permanent agenda?
We need to work to remove it from the permanent agenda. This is counter to our national security interests. It's counter to our values. And this is emblematic of the anti-Semitic rot that is pervasive within the UN system. I'm a big believer in transparency. We saw over the course of exposing, frankly, the failed leadership at college campuses, the importance of providing a spotlight when there is a lack of moral clarity, because the American people strongly support the U.S.-Israel relationship. They understand the moral case and the importance of Israel, and how we should not be funding or supporting or giving any platform, frankly, like this standing agenda item.
Are there things you have in mind in terms of how we can pay greater attention to the true human rights situations that are taking place in Iran, in Syria, and have the UN be forceful at all?
Yes, we should have, when previous U.S. ambassadors chaired the Security Council for their month, human rights was on the agenda item. I want to make sure that that continues to be a priority, speaking out on human rights issues, which there is significant bipartisan records of both sides of the aisle coming together to really raise the awareness and speak with that moral leadership from the United States of America on these humanitarian crises and speaking up for human rights.
Talk about how you would execute a strategy to do so, either unilaterally or working with allies.
We will have to, that will be a strategy that I develop with the National Security Council in tandem with Secretary Rubio and President Trump to work with our allies nations within the Security Council. And there are allies that are already considering this and looking at it, and that has been publicly reported. But obviously, pushing back on Iran is a top priority. It was a success during President Trump's first term, and we've seen the catastrophic results in loss of life during the previous 4 years when you have had an emboldened Iran that has led to directly the October 7th terrorist attack against Israel and Hezbollah firing tens of thousands of rockets against Israeli civilians.
Let's move to another topic. You and I talked about the deep rot in the United Nations when it comes to supporting terrorism against America and our allies, especially Israel. As you discussed with Senator McCormick, UNRWA has for decades provided material support for Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza. The World Health Organization has also been deeply complicit in the use of hospitals by Hamas for terrorist activities, including for the holding of hostages. The complicity of these organizations deepened after October 7th. The Biden administration embraced UNRWA and the World Health Organization. Congress prohibited the Biden administration from funding UNRWA, but the administration officials circumvented that prohibition by using UNRWA infrastructure. Yesterday, the president rightly and immediately withdrew our participation from them. I think that was a critical first step, but the next step is to enable American citizens to hold these organizations accountable. We currently have a very odd legal environment where these organizations enjoy more sovereign immunity than states, and thus are shielded from accountability. Last Congress, I introduced the Liable Act and was joined by 4 current members of this committee, including, as well as, Secretary of State Rubio. The bill will allow American victims of terrorism and their family to sue international organizations that support terrorism against this. I will soon reintroduce it in this Congress. What is your understanding of the role these organizations have played in facilitating terrorism against Americans, Israelis, and our allies?
Well, UNRWA, there were individuals in UNRWA who participated, who executed and committed terrorist acts against Israel on October 7th. Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, carried an UNRWA passport. You had a Hamas data center under UNRWA headquarters. So the rot is deep. Congress made the right decision. I was proud to be one of the leaders when it came to defunding UNRWA. And I am committed to holding them accountable and working with the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House and the President if that legislation passes.
Terrific. Thank you.
There you have it, folks. Elise M. Stefanik. Great job. Great job there testifying at her confirmation hearing in testimony in front of the United States Senate. Now, basically, Elise Stefanik, she's up for the role of UN ambassador, and it's obviously a shoo-in. She's going to be confirmed. It's not really, it's not going to be a surprise over here, but she actually had a tougher job than one would have thought. I mean, look, she's pro-Israel, okay? And when we say pro-Israel, we mean pro-democracy, right? She supports countries which support human rights, and Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, surrounded by despots, and Elise Stefanik supports democracy. And Israel is upholding that, one of the few countries in the Middle East and probably in the world. And she really had to go to bat for Israel, but even more than that, this became a thing about anti-Semitism. For the first time you've heard this in a testimony in Senate, she coined the term anti-Semitic rot, referring to the UN, and she correctly pointed out how it's just absurd and basically laughable that there is more anti-Israel resolutions passed in the UN more than all the other Middle East countries combined. We won't say which ones, but it's pretty clear, all of them. And it's just kind of really pathetic what the UN has become in terms of how anti-Israel and, as we've learned in recent years, anti-Semitic they've become. And Elise Stefanik, well, she's espousing a new age in American politics, and it's coming from Trump, President Donald Trump. And that age is, we're no longer handing out money like candy to children. We're not writing blank checks anymore, right? If America wants to fund NATO or fund the UN, they've got to carry their weight. And in this sense, among other issues with the UN that the U.S. has, one of them is they're just laughable anti-Israel bias. And she pointed out how UNRWA, Sinwar, the head of Hamas, was carrying a UNRWA teacher's card. Just outrageous. And so this blank check diplomacy that America had carried on until now is no longer the case. Trump is not giving out money for free. If the UN wants to continue to get funding from the United States, they're going to have to shape up, and that is going to take shape and form in the way of being pro-Israel, pro-democracy, and it's going to be very interesting. Elise Stefanik, by the way, for those paying attention at home, and I'm sure some of the viewers noticed this, she was on the short list for VP for Trump, actually. And people had said she's young, she's only 40, she's a first-term congresswoman, and those are legitimate concerns, and part of probably why she wasn't chosen to be VP. And of course, Trump chose J.D. Vance, a fantastic choice. But 2028, let me tell you something. Elise Stefanik is running for president, and this job as UN ambassador, I have a strong feeling that she suggested/requested this position from President Trump. I mean, once you're on the short list for VP and you don't get chosen for VP, you're obviously guaranteed a spot in the government, and beyond that, you have a little bit of sway. And Elise Stefanik understood that the next piece of the puzzle for her to continue her career and her path towards the presidency was getting some international diplomatic experience, and you saw it on full display here. She was fantastic. Let us know what you think in the comments. Do you think Elise Stefanik did a good job at supporting not just Israel, but pro-democracy, human rights? Do you think she'll be a good UN ambassador? And do you think she'll be running for president in 2028? Comment below. Hit the like button. And if you have not subscribed, please do so now. Thank you for listening. Enjoy.